My name's Damian Wild and I'm editor of Estates Gazette. I suppose we've been tracking the changing face of the high street for at least 155 years, but I can't imagine that it's ever received more attention than it has in the last few years. The local data company's collection has been at the heart of that, as well as reporting by magazines like ours and other newspapers. And what's changed? You've had all of that attention, but it doesn't feel like a great deal has changed. We've had churn, we've had toing and froing between chains, between independents, and this Independence Day report shows that the death of the independent sector is much exaggerated, but it's got a long way to go if it's going to recover fully. Looking forward over the next 5 years, it's hard to predict sector by sector what's going to be strong and what's not going to be strong. But I think as we see the economy recover, we'll see the leisure sector particularly grow. And it's the leisure sector that we expect to have a greater, more visible and more impactful presence on the high street.
My name's Mathew Ditchburn. I'm a partner in the real estate disputes team at Hogan Lovells. What I do is any contentious matters relating to real estate. So in particular, I specialise in insolvency matters, and I act for both a lot of institutional landlords dealing with struggling tenants and occupiers, and I also deal with insolvency practitioners and banks, lenders to occupiers, how to restructure their property portfolio. So I'm very interested in the health of the high street, who's coming onto the high street, who's consolidating, restructuring, going insolvent and leaving the high street. So this LDC report today is incredibly interesting for me. I think what it shows is that we're still in a period of incredible change in retail in this country. What's going on? Well, we've seen so many store closures in the last 5 years. Lots of different things going on. Some of it's structural, some of it's cyclical. So on the structural side, we've seen the rise of the internet, we've seen the rise of convenience stores, we've seen the multiples, the big chains leaving the high street in droves and heading off to the safe havens, or the relative safe havens, of primary shopping centres and retail parks. And as I say, we've seen the supermarkets moving into convenience, and the days of the weekly shop seem to be behind us, and now we're into the days of the top-up shop. So it's led to a lot of change in the high street, and as I say, a lot of empty shops. And so what's happened? Well, thankfully, it looks like there is a sector that's stepping in and exploiting that situation and seizing an opportunity and using up some of those empty shops, and that's the independents. So we're clearly seeing the rise of the indies. It's part of that process of declonification of the high street that people keep talking about. The old days of the clone street are going, the chains are going, and we're seeing much more diversified, vibrant high streets, one would hope, with independence and a kind of local services hub with hairdressers and nail bars and things like that going on. So it's interesting, but it's not all good news, because as well as a lot of independents coming onto the high street, we see a lot failing, and there's a huge amount of churn. Despite the fact that there are now two-thirds of all retail in the UK is independent, a huge number, we're seeing just as many leaving as coming onto the high street. And I think that's kind of a reflection of the nature of that sector. They don't have the large successful chains behind them to finance the startup costs for new stores, or finance the underperforming stores. So we are going to see a lot of churn, a lot of people leaving as well as coming on. But at the same time, the overall picture for the independents is good.
Hello, I'm Michael Whedon. I'm Deputy Chief Executive of the British Independent Retailers Association, BIRA. We're actually the other name on this openings and closings report alongside LDC, and we've been working with them for many years, because as a trade association for independents, which tend to be invisible in the great massive shops, that we want to see if we can expose the reality of what's going on the high streets around the country. And the best way to do that is to use the big data which lies behind the local data company database. So it suits us absolutely perfectly. What we've seen with this report today is that independents continue to open more shops than they're closing, but the churn is massive. I mean, 15,000 closed in just 500 towns, 16,000 opening. Now actually, the data which local data company are looking at here with 500 towns is not far off just 50% of their total database. So the real churn is quite possibly twice as big as that, with 30,000 independents closing and about 32,000 opening. That's a lot of dreams shattered and a lot of new dreams begun. But the good news is that for the third year in a row, the growth is on the right side, and actually it's what's making up for the net closure of multiples, the chain stores in the country. And that is the only thing which is actually pulling down the local data company's flagship statistic, which is the vacancy rate in the country, which has come down now from 14.6% to I think 13.6%. It's coming down very slowly, but it is coming down, and this report actually shows in minute detail and the big picture exactly how.
So I'm Jonathan Reynolds. I'm a teacher and researcher at Oxford University at the University Side Business School, where I'm a director of the Institute of Retail Management there. I've been working in retailing and related work for the last 30 years, and I'm particularly interested in planning and development for retailing, in multi-channel, and in innovation and entrepreneurship in the sector. So this report, I think, is a really interesting one in a number of respects. I think first of all it highlights the real amount of churn that we see in openings and closures of independents. We've always known that the barriers to entry into retailing are relatively low, but we also know, of course, now is the exit barriers are also quite low. So seeing 15,900 openings last year and 15,200 closures gives us a real sense of the turnover in businesses that lies behind that kind of number. And kind of McCorber-like, there's happiness when that net number is positive, which it has been for the last few years. But we shouldn't underestimate, I think, what lies behind that, which is the need to think about the survival of those independent businesses. If we go back and look at those 15,900 openings in the next 3 to 4 years, will those businesses still be there? Or will they have fallen prey to some of the challenges that we know affect independents, like business rates, like the costs of doing business in particular kinds of locations, and the high costs of labour and so on. I think what's also interesting about the report is that it demonstrates very much the change in the mix of many high streets. So what we see in that data is a shift away, in a sense, from comparison goods retailing in independent terms towards leisure services and consumer service outlets. And if we reflect on the nature of that change, it's very interesting to see, for example, women's clothing shops in decline. It's also interesting to see, I think, convenience stores and nail salons and tattoo parlours and so on in the ascendant. Should we complain about that? Well, that reflects, ideally, consumer demand. It also reflects, of course, the kind of things you can't do online very easily. So in some senses we see developing here a picture of the changing high street as it evolves and adapts to reflect the impact of competitive conditions like online trading and economic conditions. Where are we likely to see this going in the next few years? Well, my view is that we have to expect a period of flux, a period of volatility over the next few years. Change has always been a feature of retailing, but of course we have many more factors affecting that sector in high street locations than we've seen for many years. Over the next 3 or 4, I think we're likely to see the emergence of perhaps a new equilibrium, but different places will be on different journeys. And I think as time goes on, we're going to see much more clearly the kinds of places that will emerge as winning places from a retail point of view, the kinds of places that will differentiate themselves in some way, or the kinds of places that will become more convenience locations, or the kinds of places that simply won't make it through this transformational period of change. I think today's data starts to give us a good indication of the kind of sectors that are going to be winners and losers over the next few years.
My name's Simon Danczuk. I'm Rochdale's Member of Parliament. I'm also a member of the Communities and Local Government Select Committee, which has a responsibility at scrutinising high streets and the Department for Communities and Local Government. In terms of this report, I think it's exceptionally useful because it shows us it's effectively a health check on the high street. It tells us what's doing well and what's not doing so well. And the reason that that's important, I believe, is because high streets, town centres, city centres are the hub of our communities, and they're critically important to community cohesion. They're very important to bringing people together. Obviously, they're very important to the local economy. So it's an important report, and what it shows is that we have a growth of independence, and I think that's to be welcomed. I think the Identikit town centre is something that's going to gradually decline, and I think there's going to be a resurgence in the number of people like myself who've recently opened a shop with my wife, Danczuk's Deli. I think there'll be a resurgence in that type of shop, in the type of shop that's independent retailers that really want to serve their local communities. So I welcome the report. I think we're seeing a strong change on the high streets, and I think that's for the good. So I hope people enjoy reading this particular report. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Mathew Hopkinson from the local data company, and this is just a very brief summary from our second Openings and Closures Summit, which we held at Hogan Levels in London this morning. The chair of the event was Damian Wild, the editor of the States Gazette, and then we had a great panel consisting of Michael Weedon from the British Independent Retailers Association, Mathew Ditchburn, a property lawyer here from Hogan Levels. Then we also had Jonathan Reynolds, who's a well-known academic in the research field from Oxford University, and then finally Simon Danczuk, the MP for Rochdale, who also sits on the Communities and Local Government Select Committee. So essentially what we've seen today is the talk about the things that come out is the volume of change that we're seeing. We've seen, if you just look at the independents, over 30,000 opening and closing, that entrepreneurship, and how can that be maintained. We've also looked at the continued decline of chain retailers in our town centres as they migrate and want to occupy larger out-of-town locations, and we believe that that could continue for some time. Mathew Ditchburn made a very good point about Tyrac and also one of the gyms which have recently taken a CVA, and most people didn't think CVAs would reappear from 2 or 3 years ago with Focus and others. So taking it on from there, it's about this balance between comparison goods retail, which continues to decline across the board, and looking at the rise of leisure and services. And this is where we've seen the independents really thrive, but also we've seen a big increase in the number of chain retailers moving into the leisure sector. You can see this with the rise of, as I'd say, international food fare, the Wagamamas. You can see British food coming in with Bill's, and then you can see Portuguese with Nando's. And they're all expanding rapidly, in part driven by the sort of excitement of a population who wants to eat internationally, but also being driven by private equity and venture capital who are funding these companies. We also then looked at what is the point of difference here between regions, and how does this change, and how does the balance change? And it's all about understanding what your local economy can sustain. And a very good point made from the audience was about part of it is employment. You've got to employ people in these town centres, because when you have employment, you have footfall, and when you have footfall, you have spend. So all in all, it's been a great morning, and it really just comes down to a couple of points of what will the future be. We looked at technology and we looked at how that's changing things. The general view is that there'll still be some more consolidation, but actually there is an entrepreneurial spirit, and actually the vote that came down to at the end with my Mark Twain quote of has the death of the high street been overstated, then the answer most people thought that perhaps it has, and that we are starting to see a recovery, albeit small, but actually if we can sustain that into 2014, then there's a very bright future for most towns, but at the end of the day, not all, when we come back to local economics. Thank you for watching this, and we'll be next publishing some vacancy and open and closures reports in September, which will look at the first half of 2014 to see if any of the comments I've made now are remotely relevant and have played out into the first half of this year. Thank you, and goodbye for now.